Hello, I'm Adam,
And I'm Adrian.
and welcome to Cast from the Crypt. Today, we're going as classic as they get with 1933's King Kong, the OG.
Is
Uh,
this our first pre-code movie?
Pre-code.
Yeah, like that area where they had just adopted sound and there wasn't the law like the same amount of regulation in Hollywood yet. Now, of
Um,
course, everything is rated and
well, I'm not sure about the ratings or anything like that, but 33 old. That's all
I
I
think this is the oldest movie we've covered.
I think it might be. I think it might be. I don't think it's the oldest movie I've seen,
Oh, no, no, no.
but
Of course.
it's up there in age. It's hard to talk about this movie as a movie and not just like as a piece of history, cuz watching it that's mainly kind of what you can see it as. It's 90 something years old at this point. It's ancient, and it's also like one of those movies that made a huge impact on the way films were made. Like, the effects of this movie are legendary. Watching it with today's biases, it might not seem that way, but a benchmark for many different reasons.
Oh, yeah. Well, for me, this is the movie that sort of ushers in the modern era of filmmaking.
Okay, I
I don't know
can,
if that makes sense,
yeah,
but
I
it
can get behind that.
Yeah, that's what it's always felt like to me. This movie, and then of course all of the 1950s big budget monster features, for me, feel like that's where filmmaking as we know it today began. But I think this movie really paved the way. Of course, again, an early adopter of sound, but also the special effects, like you said. And they're really quite good. I mean, they of course they don't look the same as what we see today. That's a given, but they're good. This movie holds up in a way that only movies of the 30s, 40s, 50s kind of do, and it's hard to describe if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, thinking about it too, this is one of the earliest kaiju movies.
Oh
Maybe it
yeah.
wouldn't be called that. This predates Godzilla, which is not a revelation, but to me, thinking about it, seemed pretty crazy to me.
Yeah, it's a an early big monster movie. And I often forget that it predates Godzilla. Kong is a story. You know, I used to say I'm a bigger King Kong fan than I am Godzilla fan. I've felt that sort of waning recently.
Ooh, join me in the
But
Godzilla
checking
circle.
this out, well, you know, I love them both, but
Yeah.
but checking this out again made me excited.
Okay, good. But
I
you
love a
still
big
find
ape.
yourself waning?
I love a big ape. I do. I do. In fact, I really want to now talk about Gojira
Oh, I think we
because
have before.
no, have we the
I
original?
I think we have before. Maybe not here, maybe not elsewhere, but I'm pretty certain we have.
I guess it's because I could talk about that forever.
Yeah, I could
Um,
too. I could too. I think Godzilla's held up better,
I do too.
which
I
is
do too.
maybe not fair because it is 20 years newer than King Kong. But would Godzilla even be Godzilla if not for movies like this that came out and were like, hey, you can do stop motion, you can make an interesting set, you can mess with perspective to make small things look bigger, you know. But part of the reason this doesn't hold up, and you know what I'm about to say.
Oh, well, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it teeters on racist.
Well, teeters is a light word. It's very it's pretty racist. It's sexist, racist. You know, it was just clearly made by a certain type of man from the year 1933, a certain
Yes.
kind of American, and like I wasn't surprised. You shouldn't be surprised by that fact, I guess. However, it's still just like kind of jarring. Like, oh.
You know, what's interesting to me is, of course, directed by two men, Marion Cooper and Ernest Schoedsack. And to be honest, with as famous as this movie is, I don't know anything else about these men, which I just find fascinating. This is such a classic, iconic movie, and sorry to that man, I don't know anything else he's done. But the screenwriters, there is a woman involved in the screenwriting, or so she is credited now. I don't know if she was credited all the way back then. when this movie came out, but apparently a woman co-wrote this movie.
Well,
Yeah,
good.
for
I'm
sure.
glad. I'm glad they were open minded enough for that. Well,
Sorry.
within the film, there is part of the plot is that a director is making a movie, and they make a huge deal about how he has put a woman in the film. So
Yeah, they do. They do.
it's pretty crude. I guess initially, innately, there is this racist element of like, you've seen at least some version of this movie, some version of this story. Anne Darrow, the actress, this beautiful white blonde American girl, gets sacrificed by a bunch of natives of this island to King Kong, their gorilla god monster that they have to appease. And like innately, that's like this movie is playing on a subconscious fear of like white colonials being afraid of the savage natives of a land they go to. They leave and enter someone else's,
Sure.
And so innately that's gonna be problematic. And then it being 1933, seeing that play out, it gets worse and worse.
Yeah, it takes you out of it a little bit. You can't help but apply your modern lens to it. That being said, when I watch a monster movie, especially one, pre 1980, even that, pre 1990, I put on my monster movie fan lens where I really try to at least take it for what it is. This movie is a product of its time. And what's interesting to me is it doesn't seem like any of the spin-off sequels, remakes have been able to shake that sort of classic storyline with the natives. I believe they come back up in Son of Kong, the direct sequel to this one, which is not surprising because it came out later, but still pre 1950. But you also have the Peter Jackson King Kong, which I think is a great movie that still has those elements. In fact, I would argue the natives are even scarier. They're actually scary in that movie. And I don't know what Peter Jackson was doing or thinking, or I'm sure it wasn't his intention to replicate the same problems of the original film, but nonetheless, they are there, and I know he caught some flack for it. So I just find that interesting about this story, and as mediocre as I think that the new legendary films King Kong stuff is, I'm at least happy that they are steering clear of this. And don't get me wrong, I'm as excited as anyone to see King Kong climb the Empire State Building. I think that's a really fun and important historical storyline, just in movie history. But I think we've outgrown it. And though it's nice to go back and revisit this original story, I'm excited to see what they do with these big monsters now.
Yeah, I agree. I'm glad you mentioned Peter Jackson because if you weren't, I was gonna. Yeah, it's disappointing to see, and I do think that the natives in it, they are like really trying to be scary, but I think it's kind of dumb. It's kind of silly. It's really outdated, and like I think it shows. I think it's a really weird choice that you would have that in your movie in 2000, what, 5 or 6? Because it is like, what, where in the world is this? What island? you know?
Skull Island.
It's, yeah, Skull Island, Journey to the Center of the Earth, like cheesy 30s pulp. And the plot is completely the same. And then you're going to have these hyper realistic, or at least trying to be hyper realistic, like scary nightmare natives. Like, I just don't think it fits. I don't need more grit but I guess the early 2000s was the time for heaping spoonfuls of grit into your movie.
Right.
But
Right.
whatever. Yeah, I would like to say that when they get to the island and they see the natives, there are a lot of a lot of them are being played by people of color, but the chief is very obviously in blackface.
Okay. I looked it up.
Yeah.
I think he is a black man that is light complected, but they do nonetheless make him look darker.
Noble Johnson?
Yeah. No, I looked him up, did some digging. I think he is a black man with very light skin.
Okay. It's a man in blackface at the very least.
The quote I see here is, while Johnson was cast as black in many films, he also played Native American and Latino parts and exotic characters, such as Arabians, or even a devil in hell.
Yeah. Well, okay, looking through this guy's repertoire of movies, have found that he does some racial impression, some blackface or whatever in all the movies he's in. Like almost all the movies he's in. So famous blackface guy. Famous guy they paint.
Oh, okay, he was black. He was black.
Okay, well they're painting him various shades for
Yeah,
movies.
they made him darker.
And it's a lot. That's yeah.
He was described to have an ambiguously light complexion.
This racially ambiguous man who they decided was too ambiguous.
Yeah, they wanted him to look more native, I suppose.
Well, there you go. God. What a time.
Yeah.
Well, race aside, the themes of femininity in this movie are also, like, indicative of what time this was. Once again, the director in this movie, the character, his name's Carl Denham. He's going to make a film. He's going to take these actors to this mysterious island and make a film with a woman in it, because that's what the people want. And they're going to make a bunch of money. And right off the bat, this seems like the most easy thing to do. But right off the bat, they make a huge deal about, you're going to have a woman in your movie? You're going to put a woman on a ship? When he first meets Ann Darrow, she is down on her luck, and she's trying to steal some bread, I believe. And he stops the guy who catches her stealing bread from calling the cops. And the second he stops that guy and he, like, lets them go, she swoons. She faints into his arms because her delicate feminine sensibilities were not able to handle so much intense.
Yeah, I think the reason in the movie they give is that she was so weak she couldn't eat.
Yeah,
But she became weak that instant.
Yeah, like it was too much for her. And then the whole movie, you know, is her being kidnapped by various creatures. So,
yeah. Well, which, again, to speak to Peter Jackson's remake, that's also what it is.
Yeah, like the ultimate damsel in distress. Like the character is just a damsel in distress.
Yes, at first she is, swept up. She's in need of money. She's strapped for cash, starving. So she goes with Carl because he promises an exotic lifestyle. He's going to take her on a boat, make her a picture star, and she agrees because she has nothing else going for her. The crew that he has, the motley crew, gets on, gets on the boat called the Venture. Okay, all that is the same as the new movie. And they go off and they sail to Skull Island, where Carl Denham is going to make his most important wildlife film yet. And he, of course, is holding out information from all these other people. He doesn't want them to know exactly what he's trying to find. And that sort of ambiguous, unethical character is true of basically every Carl Denham character I've seen. He's always kind of a smarmy dude, more so interested in making his pockets deeper than the lives of the crew or even the animals that he films. But she's very quickly, when they get to Skull Island, kidnapped. Yeah. And then she just continues to get kidnapped. And
that's the movie.
Yeah, that
plot.
is the movie.
When we get onto the ship, the Venture, one of the characters we're immediately introduced to is John Driscoll, who becomes another one of the most central characters to the plot. He becomes Ann Darrow's love interest, and their love interest relationship starts off so goofy. And it's of the time, but it's also, it made me realize, like, how much of this isn't reflective of the time. You know, this is a movie made by two white guys, well-to-do in America, and the sanitized version of the world that they're presenting is really inaccurate. Because I don't think, surely this would not happen. You know, like, some woman swooning into the arms of a big, strong man and is just in love with him because he's a man. Like, that, I don't buy this so much. But I'll elaborate. She gets on the ship, and this guy's like, a woman doesn't belong on the ship. And she's, like, nice. She's just kind of, like, standing in this scene, and he's doing nothing. He's not doing a thing. And he says, well, you're already ruining everything. You're in the way. And he's like, she's just standing there in the way of nothing. And like, these comments, he keeps just saying stuff like this to her
Yeah,
throughout.
he like berates her every
Yeah,
5
just
minutes.
berates her about like, you're in the way, despite the fact that she's not. And you're a woman on a ship, and that's why I can't stand you. Stuff like that, like just rude to her for being a woman. Like,
But he's handsome.
And he is
Adam,
handsome.
he's handsome.
Yeah, and before they even get off the ship, I think he says something like, well, say, Anne, would you ever think about going out with a guy like me? And she says, but John, you hate women. And he goes, yeah.
Yeah, that line made me laugh out loud.
I know, and then they kiss. Like,
okay, but
okay.
There was something about it that I know it's ridiculous, but I don't know.
I don't believe that happened in the real world.
For some reason, I do.
No, I don't.
I just feel like people didn't have standards in the 30s.
I don't know. I think they did. I think they did at this point.
I meet people with no standards like that now.
There are extremes, of course. Like, I feel like everybody, there's so many people in the world that there is some couple that started this way, maybe, but like not most people. And like, if someone in 1930 said, how did you meet your husband? And she was like, oh, he told me he hates women and then we kissed. Like, I think they would look at you sideways. I'm sorry. Even if it was not a good time for women. The suffragette movement had happened by this point. You know, it's not like we had women authors. We had like some sense of like women aren't just the property housewife, you know, and that was the station, that was the society, but people existed outside of this radical caricature that I think this movie does present. Like, do you have relatives or have known of relatives from this time period?
Oh yeah, of course.
Is this how they acted? Is this how they were married?
You know, honestly, I don't know. I can't speak for your grandparents, but like my grandparents are pretty traditional. And traditional in the sense that the lady kind of did everything. The man came home from work, and you know, my grandmother, one of them is actually both of them I would describe as those hopeless romantic figures. You know, want to get swept up off their feet, and have always kind of been. You know, the stuff that they've told me as a man and what a man needs to do doesn't fall far from this kind of behavior. I mean, maybe not like the berating part. But
I mean, just blatant abuse is how you woo a woman.
No.
You know?
Certainly like the being a man's man.
I could see that. And that is kind of the central heroic figure of this movie. Is man's man. He's so manly, he hates women. But he gets the pretty girl anyway because he's that manly. And he will go through an evil jungle and fight a King Kong for her because he's a man.
That's right.
And
no, yeah, I mean, I don't get me wrong. I find it ridiculous too. But what I'm grateful for with this movie in particular is that it is paced pretty well, and we're in it pretty quickly. There is, of course, this romantic aspect of the film, and it's classic. It's well known, but I don't think it's what most people watch this for. I think it was put there for, to be honest, I hate to say it, but I think that was to appeal to maybe the women being brought to the movie by their partners.
So you have the pretty girl and the handsome guy is what you're saying.
Yeah. I think that
know.
romance had probably was added for widespread appeal.
Well, I think there's at least a little bit of kind of like this meta narrative, which is really crazy to say in like a 33 movie. But, you know, there is a character that's a director making a movie who's in a movie being made by some directors. As a director, you could probably like, I don't know, you have a certain insight into how a movie's made. And so the way that Carl Denham, the character, wants a woman for people to come to his movie, maybe in the same way the actual directors wanted Fay Wray to play Ann Darrow. So we have a pretty girl and a handsome guy and this power couple to bring people in. And if you look at like all the promotional material, like all these famous posters, John Driscoll is not in the posters, or if he is, it's like the back of his head. King Kong is the center of the piece, and Fay Wray is there being held, and she's like very scantily clad, I think, in a lot of these, or at least wearing like a lighter color, or like the costume's a little bit more suggestive than I think it ever is in the movie. The feminine form is more revealed in these drawn on images, I'll say. And so I could easily believe like she's in this movie to be a pretty item that's going to draw people in, draw the crowd. So at least in that sense, I can agree with you. John Driscoll maybe I think is a little less impressive as a character. And for me, like, I don't know any of these people in this movie. I don't know who Robert Armstrong is, who plays Carl Denham. I did not know who Bruce Cabot was, who plays John Driscoll. But I knew who Fay Wray was. I've known the name Fay Wray for years. She plays Ann Darrow because she is really the important character in this movie. She's, if you think about it, she's kind of the MacGuffin of this movie.
How so?
Well, there's no movie if she's not here. She really is kind of like an object in this movie, of course. She's literally being carried around the whole movie.
Yeah, she's a prop.
Distress. Yeah, she is a prop. But they need a girl. They need a pretty American white blonde girl for King Kong to kidnap and for this group of men to go after. And for the movie to even be made, right? Like, she's driving everything that happens in this movie just by virtue of being a blonde woman.
Yeah. The natives, when they arrived to Skull Island, call her the Golden Woman.
Yeah.
Because she is this shining thing. You're right. I will say this. For all of its shortcomings, I guess, just the way it's aged. I actually really like Fay Wray in this movie.
I do too. She is compelling.
I thought she was pretty good, yeah. And there is a style of acting that these movies tend to have. Any movie that predates the 60s, in my view, has a very theatrical feeling. And I don't mean theatrical movie theater. I mean theatrical. It's very presentational. It feels like it's almost on stage and not behind a screen. And I don't know if that's because the medium was so young at the time, film, or what. But I still get that from Fay Wray, that very presentational style of acting. But there's stuff that she does really well. She's got these big, expressive eyes. There's a scene in the movie when she's on the boat, and they're taking shots of her on the boat. And Carl is saying, "Look forward and scream." And so she lets out a scream. And he goes, "No, but scream like it's the most terrifying and awesome thing you've ever seen." And she does, right? With those wide, big eyes. And then that moment is later juxtaposed with when she actually sees the towering ape, Kong. And she's bound and she could be eaten at a moment's notice. And she lets out this huge guttural scream. And it builds upon that moment earlier on the ship when she's being directed. You see it actually coming out, right? Organically. And I never expect that level of performance from movie stars of this era, but I really saw terror when she actually saw Kong. It's the first time in the film that she sees him when she's bound like that by the natives. And I found it to be really, really compelling and just a great scene. I really liked it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Her acting is so much better than all the men.
Yeah, I agree.
Maybe that is, I think these early movies are just really limiting to all their male characters. Like, I'll be honest, I don't think there's much good male acting in these early movies because there is this hyperfixation on masculinity. And a part of that is, like, not being emotional. So there's no opportunity for any of these characters to express extreme emotion like Fay Wray gets to.
No, it's true. They're not very well written. If Fay Wray is just a prop in this movie, the men are set pieces. I mean, they're there, to be big and masculine and to have a handle of the situation. But the truth is that you're watching this movie to see how Kong navigates the world and how this woman, this golden woman, has really changed his life. Not for the better, obviously.
Yeah.
The men are just there.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I like to think this is one of the earliest examples of horror movie cannon fodder, too. Because so many characters are there so they can be killed in the jungle of evil on Skull Island. And I feel like that didn't happen so much in these early movies. Like, there wasn't much death in movies, even in horror movies at this time. And there's a whole crew of people who operate a ship that get picked off one by one as this movie goes on. But all these men are expendable and worth it if it means they can get back this gorgeous damsel from this evil ape. Yeah, the masculinity fixation like taints cinema at large. It's not just this movie. It's such a dumb caricature. In hindsight, it's easy to say that, but it's also easy to notice that. One other thing, I said earlier that the only actor I knew in this movie was Fay Wray, but that's not true. There's another actor on the boat, on the ship, the Venture. They have a Chinese cook. Did you recognize him?
I did look it up afterwards and didn't know what he was from.
It's from a movie that we've talked about together here on this very podcast.
Oh.
He plays Walter from
Tremors.
Tremors. Yeah,
Tremors.
he owns that he plays Walter in Tremors. He owns that shop.
Does he really?
Yeah, he gets eaten by a graboid, sadly.
He's in Son of Kong.
I mean, yeah, I haven't seen Son of Kong. I'm glad they brought him back so they could kill him off, because he's the only one that got out alive. So
wait, hold on. He plays him in Tremors?
yeah, he plays Walter in Tremors.
Shout out.
That means he must have been pretty dang old in Tremors if he was in this movie in 1933. But yeah, he was born... Okay, maybe I have to rescind everything I just said.
I was confused because it seems like he would be very, very old.
He would have to be. Okay. But it says here in the cast, Victor Wong. But I've clicked on it, and I'm reading, and it says he was born in 1927. And so so that doesn't work out.
Okay.
But then who was the man in the movie then?
I guess another Victor Wong.
Another Chinese man named Victor
Wong. Damn.
Well, okay. There's all right. I'm gonna find like a different. We're learning a lot together today.
We are. That's really funny.
Live and learn. I'm looking it up IMDb now. Yeah, Victor Wong, Charlie the Chinese cook, uncredited. There is a man named Victor Wong. Okay, this says the guy in the movie is named Victor Wong, and he's born 1906. He died in 1972. So yes, There are two Chinese men named Victor Wong who were acting in Hollywood almost back to back, because other Victor Wong started being in movies in the 80s, and this guy died in the 70s.
That's awesome.
So it's as if there was one really long... Do you think maybe he's like a vampire and he just faked his death and came back to keep doing movies?
Oh, man.
I've derailed this. Where were we?
That's okay.
Okay, well, I'm going to talk about the stop motion now.
There we go.
Because I have to, because if you know me, you know I love stop motion. It's maybe my favorite form of storytelling, because I don't think anyone half-asses a stop motion. If you're willing to put that much effort and work into something, that meticulous, you are going to want it to be good. And that's probably why this movie is so known and has so much longevity, is because in 1933, you went to the theater and you saw this. You were amazed by how crazy the effects are. And watching it today, you can tell, okay, it's obviously a clay dude or whatever. And they knew that then too, but it is impressive, the stuff they do with perspective and physically cutting the film too, to make it look like these clay stop motion creatures are actually in front of a living person and moving in real time with these real actors. And it's pretty impressive. Watching it, I mean, I am thinking oh, that's really cool how they did that. They really thought about this and really thought about these filming techniques that were not utilized to this extent, I don't think, before this movie. And that's why this movie's known. That's why this movie's famous. That's why this movie's so well regarded as a piece of cinema history. And I love it.
Yeah, most of the stop motion animation here was done by Willis O'Brien, a very prolific animator who worked on Mighty Joe Young as well, a movie that I really, really like, maybe even more than this one. But a neat thing about this film in particular is all of those sequences took a really long time, namely the big bad fights, right? The fights with the Tyrannosaurus Rex took 7 weeks. Even the pterodactyl, I think, took a week. So this is a lengthy process, a labor of love, and a lot of respect to O'Brien for his work. But something that's neat is O'Brien had a protege that worked with him later on several films named Ray Harryhausen, who you probably know well. You did The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, did Jason and the Argonauts, did Clash of the Titans.
Oh, classics, yeah.
Just an iconic stop motion animator. So I just like that. This movie was very, very important in the history of motion animation. Some of the biggest names either worked on it or were working under people that worked on it. And kind of a dead art form now, but pretty neat to see.
I think it's really interesting that the legacy of this movie's stop motion is not just in the fact that they use these techniques later and they use this type of animation to mesh with live action and juxtapose it with real actors, but it also literally lives on, like, person to person. This is the same guy who learned from that guy, and there's this more direct legacy as well into later films, and I think that's interesting. Stop motion, maybe not in tandem with any live action today, is still pretty prolific as its own sole media. But yeah, so this is another movie that I watched with my grandfather. So I have seen this movie before this most recent watch, but I don't think I've seen this movie since I was 6.
Oh, wow.
So it's been a long time, and there was like, watching it was kind of like watching it for the first time, but there was a few scenes that left such an impression. I was like, oh, I remember this scene. I remember this scene. Those scenes being when they kill the Stegosaurus and when King Kong fights the T-Rex. Those really stuck out in my mind and felt familiar to me.
Yeah, well, those are iconic scenes. I love the T-Rex fight, and I do like the big flashy version in the Peter Jackson version. But this is just so charming and so well done for the time. The matte paintings in the background with the claymation in front. In fact, all of the matte paintings, that's another part of this film that probably goes on just undiscussed. Everybody talks about the claymation, but the crew would actually paint on glass, and that's how they would get the shots of those wide expanses of jungle and Skull Island in general.
When they first got to Skull Island, I think there's a shot of the island and the shore as the boat's coming to the shore, and very small detail, but something I really noticed was it's a painted scene, but in the top corner they have what look like real birds, or at least moving birds, that couldn't have been a part of the painting. So this is another example of them editing the film, the literal physical film, to have these real world moving elements to what would otherwise be an isolated frame. And that's really cool. It foreshadows the effects later on in the movie.
What I'm really fond of in this movie, I mean, of course the jungle sequences are good, but the stuff I find even more impressive is later on when Kong is in the city and you get to see him first on the Broadway stage and you see the people in frame with him, but seemingly right next to him. All the other shots, Kong is usually in the background because that's, as you said earlier, they had to actually splice him in or cut him in. And he's often in, not the foreground, the background. In the Broadway scene and in various other city scenes, it's like he's right there next to them. And I think they're really well done. Also, the jungle scenes tend to be darker. And so stuff has a pass, right? In the shadows of the trees. I think it helps, but when he's in the bright lighting, when he is out in the city, when he's up on the Empire State Building and the sun has come up, I'm really, really impressed by the creature and by the editing. And I don't know what the post-production process really looked like in this movie, but nonetheless, I can imagine it was tedious, considering that so much of the stop motion took so long.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about how, much more difficult the city scenes must have been than the jungle scenes. But you're right. It is impressive because there's scenes where whole crowds of people are running away from him. And he climbs a building at one point and looks in the window. It's pretty impressive. Also, like I said, this movie is atypical of its time because of how many people die. The cannon fodder people die too, but when he gets into New York, he just kills people. He really goes on a spree.
Yeah.
I think in the Peter Jackson movie, he's just running around wreaking havoc, but I don't think he just kills people like he does in this movie. He pulls a woman out of a window and sees it isn't Anne, and he just like throws her. It's supposed to be horrific, and it is kind of horrific. To me, it was a little funny. This woman's sleeping in her bed, got the nightcap on, face mask, snoozing, and then this clay gorilla looks in the window and just scoops her up and throws her.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal. So I don't know what version of this movie you watched, but in 1933, when this movie premiered, there was no production code, as I said earlier. So when it was released, and now, I guess with subsequent re-releases, this movie has been edited a lot. A lot of the violence has been edited out, and even small details. So I believe there was a version, where Kong is undressing Anne, and he sniffs his fingers
Oh.
after he undresses her.
Oh.
Yeah.
God.
My version did not
Yeah, I
have that
didn't see
scene.
that.
My version did not have that scene in it, right? And there's a lot of scenes that are cut out of the jungle. For example, there's a scene where there's all these big insects, like spiders, and there's some reptilian monster and a kraken. And, famously, Kong shakes the crew members off of this big log that is serving as a bridge over a ravine. And in that ravine, there's all those creatures. And these bodies just plummet to the ground and hit the ground like a sack of potatoes. And that was cut later on. There's only a few stills from that scene that are still there. For the most part, they're completely gone. And there was also this like gruesome bloodshed that happened in the ravine with all those creatures. The version we get today, to my knowledge, is the one that I saw, where you're just seeing bodies fall. Still pretty gruesome, but not nearly as cool.
Oh, I like that they were being this bold in 1933.
Oh yeah,
I mean, and that would the fact that also was so atypical at the time would make this even scarier. Like, you're not used to seeing someone die in a movie, and this gorilla is going on a spree. How many freaking? What is his body count? There's like, I'd say like 20 people at least he kills on camera. He's kind of he's a beast. And so now I guess I'll segue into talking about comparing it to newer iterations. In this one, this is the most bestial I think Kong is. We see a much more sympathetic King Kong in like the 70s versions and in the Peter Jackson version. Mm-hmm. He's more of just like a gorilla that you can relate to, and he's just an animal being an animal. And in this one, he's a fanged monster killing randomly through the streets of New York and on this island.
People.
Yeah.
Just stepping on people and pressing them into the ground.
Yeah, just being a beast. Just murdering left, right, and center. Going on a rampage. And Anne Darrow is also not as strong as a character. She's just a damsel in distress, but later, and this is a change I really like, she kind of like develops a relationship with Kong. It's a little Stockholm syndrome-y, but he's also a gorilla. But, like, there's that famous scene, in my mind famous at least, in the Peter Jackson movie where she's dancing with King Kong and he's becoming, like, a little more of a happy monkey. And I know, I haven't seen the 70s version, but I know she's, like, she ends up caring for him. And I like that element more. I think it at least lets Anne be more than a screaming woman for the whole movie. And then it makes the final scene where King Kong falls off the Empire State Building and dies, it makes it a little more emotional and tragic, because she does care about this creature. She didn't want him to die, and I think that's a good change. And I think if they're willing to change that, they could have changed other elements of this story, but they didn't. But those are changes I do like, and I feel like they add.
I do think they add, and I do think that they probably could have changed more, but I don't know. Maybe their concern was that people wouldn't like it as much if they changed the other stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. The main reason I think this movie keeps getting readapted is simply because of how old it is. And this movie came out in 1933. So in the 70s, you might think, okay, well, we can do this movie with better effects, better acting, bigger budget. And then in 2005, you can say the same thing. But Peter Jackson really wanted to keep it close to the original story as possible, or at least close to the 70s story, I guess, with this whole romance subplot. But I think just remaking it for the sole purpose of updating the effects is the wrong way to go. You can change the plot, you can make it more unique, And honestly, like, the effects are always going to age bad. 1970s, like, the effects are really good on both of those remakes. Don't get me wrong. But, you can still tell it's, not real a lot of the times. And even in the Peter Jackson remake, like, there's a few scenes where the CGI aged really poorly.
Yeah.
For as
No,
good as
you're right.
it looks and as big budget as it is. And King Kong himself looks great in that movie, but, like, the dinosaurs don't look that great. A lot of the island stuff's a little funky looking. And so
The green screen or blue
Yeah.
screen, whatever
Oh,
Weta
yeah.
uses, has aged poorly. You're right.
Yeah, so I think if you're adapting the story, you have to look past the effects. And
Well, like I said, there's something about these old movies with this caliber of effects that just ages them better, in my view. So, in essence, no, this movie hasn't aged well socially. The critiques for it being racist are accurate. But nonetheless, the stop motion is fantastic, and there's something about this type of animation that I think just makes a movie more timeless. And it's why they're always going to call this movie a classic, and they're probably never going to call Peter Jackson's that. As much as I enjoy that movie, because this movie will stand the test of time.
has, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Has and will continue to, despite its shortcomings.
I have heard great things about the 70s movies. My grandpa
I
loved
need to
this
watch 'em.
movie so much. And he really liked the 70s movies too, of course. Any King Kong was going to be up his alley. But I have not seen the 70s version. I didn't know there was a 70s version for a very long time, because that's not the one that stands the test of time.
Right.
Peter Jackson's, I think, might a little bit better just because it had like kind of a famous, I don't remember the budget, but like kind of a famously huge budget, and it was a Peter Jackson movie. But yeah, this is the original. This is the story as old as time, or at least
And
in
if
our
you don't
modern
know-
perception of time.
If you don't know the story by now, God help you.
It's King Kong.
Yeah.
You've seen a parody of it on The Simpsons at least.
Right. Or you've played Donkey Kong.
Yeah,
Ape climbs a thing.
steals
that's-
woman.
Yeah, ape steals woman, climbs a thing. Man saves.
Yeah, that's okay. The final thing I'll say that I don't think they really change very much in any version of this that I wish they would. I wish they would have done it in this movie. Is the character of Carl Denham. You kind of described him earlier. He is smarmy throughout this movie. And like whenever they're in the jungle and men are dying, he's like, no, we got to get that shot. He's willing to do anything for that perfect shot. And he is characterized this way, at least in the Peter Jackson movie. I can probably assume in the 70s version too. And he's truly the villain of this movie, really.
Oh, yeah.
Like King Kong's just a big gorilla who lives on an island. This man brings his crew to the island, steals this gorilla, and brings him back to New York City. The gorilla escapes, destroys the city, and then is killed. He caused all of that. It's this man who did that. And he never had, like, he should be in jail. He's a menace. Yeah,
There's no charges.
He faces no charges. Nothing bad ever happens to him. Nobody really says a harsh word to him. And then at the end of the movie, he gets to say the profound, "It was beauty that killed the beast." He gets to say that. Like, this jerk. If I was sitting in that crowd and I watched that gorilla fall, and then that guy came in and said that, like, I'd be so angry. I'd be like,
Yeah, I would be too.
go to jail. And he never gets any comeuppance. It's like a part of the plot that just like kind of gets lost by the end of the movie. And I wish they would bring it back or acknowledge it at least and wrap it up, because it feels like they're setting him up to, he really is the villain, and it's not unintentional. But then they don't do anything with it.
Maybe in the next retelling. When I was a kid, this is a fun anecdote about I almost said Star Wars, about King Kong. When the Peter Jackson movie came out, my brother took me to go see it in theaters, and I was young, very young. The first time they show the natives, I wept. But that's not the fun part of the anecdote. So after I finally got the courage to like look up again and the movie kind of calmed down, I really, really fell in love with the ape. And as you said, he is much more sympathetic in the Peter Jackson movie than he is in this movie. In this movie, he is a beast, which is probably what he should be always, because he's being taken out of his home and exploited. But nonetheless, I remember vividly, like it was yesterday, watching him fall from the Empire State Building in that movie and crying to my brother because I did not want him to die. And when the credits rolled, I made my brother wait with me till the end to see if there was anything else.
Oh.
And there wasn't. And we
That's
walked
super
out.
sweet.
And we walked out and he said, "Well, buddy, maybe one day you can write your own version where he lives."
Oh, that's the sweetest anecdote I've ever heard. I love that.
Well, and I won't write it.
Well.
I am grateful that new stuff is being made where we don't have the yelling woman, we don't have the racist subplot, we don't have the Empire State Building, as classic as that is. You know, the Legendary Pictures stuff I'm not a huge fan of, as you know, but Kong is cool. Like, objectively, the new Kong is cool.
Oh, yeah.
And yes, it's a sweet story, I suppose. But yeah, I think about that a lot whenever I rewatch any of these movies because there is new stuff now being made, and he's not just falling off of buildings and dying.
I don't think I was ever afraid of the movie like you seem to have been. I thought the worms were cool, though. That's my favorite part about the Peter Jackson movie, is when they fall in that pit and there's those worms.
Yes.
Those
Also,
worms are
Andy
sick.
Serkis being a character actor in that movie. Well, actually, doesn't he play both the ape and he's on the crew?
I think so. That's also a movie I have not seen in many, many years.
Yeah, he's the ape.
I
It's
believe
his
it.
first big screen ape.
He loves
But
being
then-
apes.
but he
loves monkeying
also
around.
plays like Lumpy or Bumpy, whatever that guy's name is, and he's got like big swollen eyes and he's gross.
He kind of would be named Lumpy.
He's good. He's good.
I think that's wrapped up everything I have to say about this version of this movie, at least.
Me too. I agree. I will say there's others. that
I
I'm
know, and we
interested
might
in
have to
watching.
watch them. It's like if the last time I watched this movie was when I was 6, then the last time I watched Peter Jackson's was when I was 10. So
Yeah.
it's also been a long time since I've seen that one. But yeah, I'm glad we could revisit this. You said you wanted to watch a kaiju movie, and I know King Kong is your favorite, and I thought, you know what? It has been most of my life since I've seen that movie. Let's do it, and I'm glad we did. I'm glad I got
Yeah.
to revisit it. A weird
Me too.
nostalgia. But yeah.
Me too. Me too.
Okay, well, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
And thank everybody for listening. Goodbye.